my approach, and I think the real Jewish approach to tochacha, to criticism, is introspection. And too often, when we're criticized either as individuals or as a people, we tend to become defensive instead of actually thinking about the criticism. But I really do believe that the healthiest and most authentically Jewish response to criticism really is introspection. We need to think about the criticisms that we're hearing. And I think we need to think, just like that's true on a personal level, I think it's true on a national level. We need to think about everything that the Palestinians are saying, that their supporters are saying, that the BDS movement is saying, and ask ourselves, well, first of all, is this true? Second of all, if it's true, is it correct? Meaning, is this an expression or a betrayal of our identity that they're criticizing? And even if it's not true, we should ask ourselves, why are people seeing us this way? Are we behaving in such a way? Because there's also a concept of Marat Ein. Like, are we behaving in such a way that causes people to see us as something other than we're not? I've said many times that the Jews in Judea are not the Americans in Afghanistan or the French in Algeria. The problems arise when we begin to behave like the Americans in Afghanistan or the French in Algeria or any other example of imperialism or settler colonialism. At the end of the day, Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and many of the colonial structures that exist in the West Bank and oppress the Palestinian population actually undermine the Jewish people's very real natural connection to Judea and Samaria. And I think that our behavior, our policies, and I think those policies, what Rav Yishai mentioned before about some of his friends in Miluim not knowing who the wife of our ancestor Yitzchak was, I think that's a symptom of what I'm talking about, just like the occupation is a symptom of what I'm talking about. Both are betrayals of our identity. Both result from us adopting a Western paradigm. Earlier, Rabbi Yishai mentioned Tzipi Livni, and he called her a leftist. I don't know if you remember Adar, but Rabbi Yishai called Tzipi Livni a leftist. And that caught my attention only because I think this is the only country in the world where somebody like Tzipi Livni could be called a leftist. I don't know if anybody with her politics would be called a leftist anywhere else in the world. And I think it's a result of us using, like I said before, foreign frameworks that are inauthentic to us. This idea of left and right, this idea of religious and secular, don't really fit our identity. I think when we talk about the divisions in Israeli society, we can say that there are Israelis who are living Jewish history and who are relating to a lot of the contemporary challenges within the context of our historical experience and the wisdom of our prophets and sages and things our ancestors had to struggle with, and applying those lessons to modern times. Those are people who are, I think, 100% fully living in Jewish history. And I think there are people who are completely living in Western civilization in 2021, and that's their ideological paradigm. And I think, by the way, there's value to both. I think one is we can call Yehuda and one we can call Yosef, right? And there's a value to Yehuda and there's a value to Yosef. But ultimately, if you look at almost any contentious issue in Israeli society today, it comes down to a conflict between Jewish nationalism and Western liberalism. Almost every conflict in Israeli society is an expression of this friction between Jewish nationalism and Western liberalism. And I think ultimately what we need to do is transcend that friction, or that ostensible friction, with what I call Hebrew universalism. Because the problem, I think one of the things that prevents a lot of the Israelis of Yosef, and by the way, some of the Yosef people have kippot, and some of them are actually Roshei Yeshiva. I think you can definitely meet, even in Gush Etzion, right? In Judea, you can meet Roshei Yeshiva, heads of yeshivot, big rabbanim with beards and kippot, who are 100% Yosef, who are living in the ideological paradigm of Western civilization in the modern age, right? And are turned off by, and I know Yishai knows exactly what I'm talking about because he went to Yeshiva University and probably studied with many of these rabbis. And they're turned off by what they see as like an ugly Jewish nationalism. Because Jewish nationalism doesn't address the things that are important. to those who are concerned with human rights and social justice, etc. And I think our Torah actually does. I think our identity actually does. I think our prophets and sages actually do have answers to these questions. And I think that that's part of the transition from narrow Jewish nationalism to Hebrew universalism.